recipient of the Caretaker Award. And we're happy to have him here today to talk a little bit about the things he's done over time and what he's viewed about the history of the waters of Green Bay. So with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, and thank you for the invitation to speak, John. And I want to credit Bud Harris. I saw him just a bit ago, okay, there you are. See, my eyes as I age. When I came here, this was ECO-U, and Bud Harris was my advisor for my undergraduate program. And somehow during the 80s, I asked him about the history of the Fox and Wolf Rivers, and he said he was starting to collect some, but he didn't have enough time. Why don't I help him? So he sent me out with a tape recorder, and I started recording. And it's been 20 years of collection of interviews and writing of articles and production of videotapes and CDs, because there's a great story here. Wisconsin is a story of citizen activism, and the environment is very dear to the hearts of the people of Wisconsin. My assignment here is to introduce the, let's see how to turn this on here. Okay, first, because this usually gets left off, a lot of the pictures I've used have come from the Neville Public Museum, which is an organization which needs a lot of support in terms of people volunteering and people contributing. So I want to mention them first before, so I don't neglect them. But I've been covering the history of the Fox-Wolf watershed. Now that was a strange term, I think, and even up to 1990 about. People talked about the Fox River as all it was a ribbon of water between Appleton and the waters of Green Bay. But as we looked closer at pollution, a lot of work had been done on cleaning up the factories and the sewage treatment plants. We realized that everything that happens in this area of the watershed contributes to the pollution, whether it's nutrients or toxics or migratory invasive species. So the history project expanded to cover that, and involved at one time 200 people, supporters, and I think, as I understand, the videotape that was produced by our group is on the website now. This is some of the highlights. This area is 6,400 square miles. That's as large as the state of Connecticut, and the river flows from the central part of the state, Marquette County, northeast. A lot of people in at least the Green Bay area when I came here said, so this is the only north-flowing river in the world. Somehow that myth got passed around, but of course there are north-flowing rivers all over the place. Rivers don't follow toward the poles, they go by gravity. So one of the first lessons is that you can tell where the lowest spot is because that's where the water's headed. And this river actually flows to the northeast. It flows at times to the west and at times to the south. An interesting part of it is that it's called the Fox River. Actually, the largest tributary is the Wolf River, which starts up in the Crandon area. And if it had been another committee that designated the name, it might have been called the Wolf River for the entire length. But the Wolf River, which comes from the north, joins the Fox at Oshkosh. We have the Oshkosh contingent here to tell us about that later. The thing about a watershed is I like this blue and red lines that happen to come on this graphic, but it's a biological system. If you know, there are these paintings that show people as, like in a medical illustration, as being the veins in the arteries. And I think that's a helpful metaphor. Anything that is put on the land, whether it's old paint or lead from batteries or air pollution, settles on that land, has the possibility and often has the probability of moving with the water into the larger body of water. Now, Lake Michigan, of course, part of the Great Lakes, is our drinking water supply, and it's a tremendous world resource. So it deserves protection. Actually, it's our obligation to protect it. Looking back historically, this was an area, massive biological productivity. This waterfowl shot really isn't from Wisconsin, but is representative of what it was like. After American settlement began, 1837, they opened up a land title transfer office here in Green Bay, and then the great flood of emigration from the East Coast started, and people from all parts of the world started to come here. And doing so, that's a massive population explosion. There were only between 12 and 25,000 human beings here. These were the indigenous Indians. And today there are like 6 million. I didn't get to check the latest 2010 or 11 census, but it's like 230 people for every one that was here then. And with all those people came land clearing and the technologies that people used. Overlogging, which is logging by without guidance, without really forethought, because don't worry, it's going to last forever. That was a myth in Wisconsin that you could cut trees forever and you'd never run out. And of course, anywhere that story is told in the world, you learn soon it's not true. There was a northern part of the state, it was called the cutover, because the loggers companies came through and they didn't do anything about planting or soil erosion. The streams were wiped out. The fisheries were then scorched by the sun. They had been protected by the tree cover. And massive fires occurred. There was something called the Peshtigo fire in the 1870s, which burned a large part and killed an enormous number of people just north of Green Bay. But that was a part of the misuse of the resource. Think about what happened to Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a big sponge. You know, we think about water, we're 70% water, right? And without water, there's no life. They look on Mars, they say there's no water here, there can't be life. Well, Wisconsin was super saturated with water. The soils in the forest cover were great sponges. And when they cleared the trees and wanted to plant crops, they had to put drain tiles, like a sewage system, under the soil to carry the water away. That had consequences too, but that's just to tell you that there's a tremendous human impact on Wisconsin, and we're in a period of restoration, in a way. There was also sort of the blind misuse of the resources. There was commercial hunting. There used to be massive populations of all kinds of diving ducks and other waterfowl. We still have waterfowl. We have now, well, we see a lot of mallards. We see Canada geese. And those were once minority parts of the population. They are very used to adapting to people, much like rats are and white-tailed deer. They live on our lawns in the backyard. They live on air conditioners and next to our swimming pools, whereas the former waterfowl populations of Wisconsin, they flee if they get anywhere near, or a human being gets anywhere near them. So there's been massive changes, even though you might see nature all around. We've also exploited and overexploited the fisheries. The first U.S. Fisheries Commission investigated and surveyed Lake Michigan in the 1880s and said it had been destroyed by fishing. Now think about that. Now, to us, that's ancient history for an awful lot of people. How could it have been destroyed back then? But that's what they reported, and much happened soon after that to the inland lakes. Wisconsin is dotted with over 10,000 lakes, and those were once major production centers for fisheries. And things have changed where, well, I can't go into the details on that right now, but I'll talk about the fur-bearing animals. You know, traders came here to get the beaver pelts. And after the beaver were wiped out, moved to other furs. We had, until recently, massive populations of muskrats. This is a scene from there was a guy who trapped muskrats at the mouth of the Fox River, and he had a building next to the Pulliam power plant. And the traders would come up from Chicago to buy pelts from them. And this is a shot from the 1940s. Interesting that well, you'll hear the people who got involved in that became the conservation advocates, the people who were involved in these touching the land activities. When I came here in the 70s, and even up until recently, one of the comments made is that the people here are just apathetic. They don't care about the environment. And I ran into a new PhD, Dr. Lertzman, who opened my eyes to some new thoughts about what people are doing. That when the terror is too great or the fear is too great, people close up. If they feel powerless, they can't do anything about it, they withdraw. And they say it's not a problem because they can't do anything about it and they don't want to face the fact that they're powerless. Part of the stories I found here is that we have not been powerless here. We've done things, but an awful lot of us have thrown up our hands at the size of the task. Anybody involved in non-point pollution control? How do we talk to all these landowners, all these property owners, all these governments, and get them to do something? That's a massive task. But we are taking steps. That's part of the, oops, wrong way. Part of the tradition, and it's a big part of the culture of the Fox Wolf Basin. This is Judge Henry Grass. He was a Brown County judge, and as such, he was an authority figure in the community. He was one of the founding members of the Isaac Walton League, a national organization which started in Chicago in 1922. And Judge Grass was one of the apostles for the Isaac Walton League. Sometimes the cases he ruled on in court had to do with natural resources, and when they were, he knew about the consequences to the environment and did something. I could use a signal of time, like when am I supposed to be done, John? Okay. The people of this area, because they use the resources, you get attached to what you use, you learn to love what you know. The picture on the left is a muskrat, by the way, for those who don't know. I didn't know when I came here from Chicago. A muskrat looks like a rat to me. And they call them rats. They have these long tails, but they have fur. I understand, Bud Harris told me yesterday that there's a mysterious decline in the populations of muskrats, which were very, very common here until recently. Gordon Bluebolts, who took part in the advising on the founding of this university back in the late 60s, grew up on a farm west of town. A town that was, an area that where the people were deeply conservative, very religious. He has a couple brothers who are Lutheran pastors, whatever, very much into you don't waste anything. They had a part of their property where he grew up with animals where they didn't touch it. It was sort of like set aside for God. We don't touch that part. And one of the stories in his biography is that on Easter, which is a big religious holiday for Christians, of course, they would go out to that creek that flowed through that patch of land and get a bucket of water. And then members of the family would sort of like a sprinkling of water to renewal of the spring and connection with the earth. Bluebolts, as I said, he was involved in advising on the founding here. We also had a lot of non-European family involvement.